Good evening, I'm Robin Dwyer. This is ITV News London. This Armistice Day, people gathered together across the capital to remember those lost in the last 100 years of conflict. At the Tower of London, the last of more than 800,000 poppies was planted, one for each of the soldiers who died in the First World War. From the cenotaph in Whitehall to train stations, offices and schools, people fell silent to mark the moment the Great War came to an end. Our correspondent Simon Harris reports on how London remembered its dead.
Standing in a sea of red, he seemed a solitary figure among the poppies, reading a roll call of names.
Lance Sergeant G.A. Newgas, London Regiment.
But General Dannett was far from alone. Instead, he was surrounded by thousands of people here to witness the final act in the Tower of London's powerful tribute to the fallen. Punctuated by the sound of guns and with the smell of cordite wafting over the moat, the list of names was the prelude to the moment the last poppy was planted. An honour given to a 13-year-old army cadet from Sonning in Berkshire with his own reason to remember.
He was called Patrick Kelly. He's my great-great-great-uncle. He was killed in France.
What were you thinking of?
I was just reflecting on the amount of poppies there were, and each one represents a soldier who didn't come home.
And then, at the 11th hour, on the 11th day of the 11th month, the everyday noise and bustle of a capital city suddenly faded away. For 2 minutes, a spine-tingling silence descended. Construction sites came to a standstill, workers downed tools, office staff left their desks to come outside.
I was thinking of my son, and I was thinking of every poppy being symbolising somebody's son.
My granddad. Yes, my mum's dad.
Lots of fallen comrades.
Across London, people paused to reflect at the cenotaph in Whitehall, at smaller memorials like here in Holborn, the Imperial War Museum at Lambeth, and at tube and train stations. This was Liverpool Street. At Bromley High School, pupils wore poppies they knitted themselves. But on the 100th anniversary of the outbreak of war, it was the Tower of London which captured the mood. This extraordinary act of remembrance was a one-off, never to be repeated. Because tomorrow, the poppy harvest begins, and within a matter of weeks, the moat here at the Tower of London will have turned from red to green. Blood-swept lands and seas of red will be gone forever. Simon Harris, ITV News, the Tower of London.
Elsewhere in the capital, the first memorial to African and Caribbean soldiers who died in the two world wars was unveiled in Brixton. Engraved on the monument are the names of all the African and Caribbean regiments which contributed to the British war effort. The memorial was unveiled by 88-year-old Sam King, who served with the RAF engineers in World War II.
A large amount of people died, especially aircrew types, and not enough is being said about that. But thousands of English people died, so that's a normal thing, but people don't think West Indians died fighting for Britain.
In today's other news, a law student from West London accused of plotting to target Tony Blair will face a retrial after the jury was discharged. The partly secret terror trial collapsed today after 3.5 weeks of evidence at the Old Bailey. 26-year-old Errol Insadel denied preparing a Mumbai-style attack on the streets of London. A Metropolitan Police officer has been dismissed without notice for gross misconduct. PC James Kiddie was found guilty of assaulting a suspected shoplifter in a store on Regent Street 2 years ago. He appealed earlier this year, but a judge upheld his conviction. The brother of a man from Wandsworth who died in a speedboat accident in Cornwall says he hopes safety lessons will be learned. Mark Milligan's brother Nick and his daughter Emily were struck and killed by the boat they fell from in May last year. Speaking after an inquest jury ruled their deaths were an accident, he paid tribute to the people who tried to save them. From Cornwall, Ruth Zorko reports.
Nick Milligan and his 8-year-old daughter Emily, father and child, killed in the same moment after being flung from a moving speedboat. Today, an inquest decided their deaths were an accident, but their family called for better training for those driving powerboats.
The family would like to acknowledge the bravery of all those involved in the rescue and offer our formal thanks to the witnesses who have supported this inquest. We would also like to thank the emergency services and the people of Cornwall who have given us great support since this tragic accident, from which we hope safety lessons will be learned.
The Milligan family had been on a pleasure trip on their speedboat while on holiday in Cornwall. Victoria Milligan was driving when her husband grabbed the wheel and jerked the throttle to help her turn the boat. It moved violently and threw the family into the water before circling around them at full speed, hitting them as it went. Nick Milligan suffered a fatal head injury. Emily was also killed, and Victoria lost her lower leg. Nobody had been wearing a safety kill cord, which could have cut off the engine as they fell overboard. Both verdicts were delivered unanimously, and the coroner said she'd be writing to the Royal Yachting Association to ask them to consider strengthening their advice on the level of training needed by those driving high-speed powerboats and whether such training should be made compulsory. The deaths of Emily and Nick Milligan were horrible accidents, but with better training about the sheer power of this kind of boat, their family hope it will be a tragedy that won't be repeated. Ruth Zorko, ITV News, Truro.
Now let's take a look at the weather forecast with Manali Luca.
The seasons make our soups. New Covent Garden Soup sponsors the ITV London weekday weather.
Hello there, good evening to you. It's a windy night ahead with some outbreaks of rain, although the rain fairly light and patchy. And after the rain, we've got some showers to follow in for tomorrow. Scattered showers around first thing in the morning, in between some dry spells, quite a cloudy start to the day and a windy start to the day as well. But things will slowly start to improve through the afternoon, becoming drier and brighter. The winds easing down as well, and temperatures reaching highs of 14 degrees Celsius. Have a good night. Bye-bye for now.
New Covent Garden Soup sponsors the ITV London weekday weather.
Finally this evening, with so many lives lost in the First World War, it's inevitable that most of us have a link to someone who fought. The 100th anniversary of the start of that war has sparked an interest in many to find those links, and the Imperial War Museum has been helping them do so. Luke Hanrahan went to meet one group who've enlisted that help.
Second Lieutenant Eli Hudson of the Royal Garrison Artillery, a famous flautist of his time, died of the injuries he sustained at the front, aged 42. His friend, Sergeant Bugler Sidney Moxon of the London Regiment, was killed in action in 1916, aged 38. Members of today's London Symphony Orchestra have been looking back at the lives of their forebears, the musical soldiers who fought and played on the front line of World War I.
I can see Eli Hudson was a flute player just like me, very similar age, who had a career, a family, everything, and then the war came along and you know, he didn't make it past the end of the war, and it's quite a humbling experience to see just what everybody did. Of course, I mean, we're just looking at the LSO players, and that they're a little microcosm of what everybody did in the country at the time.
It's rare that this orchestra allows anyone to film them rehearse, but today, a gesture of fellowship.
In each orchestra, school and football club, in every community, a Londoner died during World War I, and learning about those individuals is a way of keeping their memory and history alive.
The untimely death of Sidney Moxon.
Those stories brought to life by these archives. Sidney Moxon's principal job in the army was as a bugler, entertaining the troops, but many musicians also acted as stretcher bearers.
He'd gone in to help a colleague that had been wounded in an attack and was helping them out to safety when he was hit by another shell.
Eli Hudson played piccolo at the front, But so shocked by what he saw, he signed up to fight.
The records show he died January 1919, just after the war, from cancer of the stomach, it says, and we gather that some of the effects of gas are related to this cancer, and so he died in a military hospital, has a military grave.
The stories of two men, a few of the many, who came from every walk of life in this city. Luke Hanrahan, ITV News.
That is it from us, but don't forget you can look up what's been happening in the capital on our website itv.com/London. We're back on air tomorrow with updates in Good Morning Britain, but from the late team, good night.